Although it's impossible to tell, this absolute mess of a film is based on one of the best short stories in the Sword of Destiny. Today, we're specifically looking at A Little Sacrifice, and a character who was one and done that you might not know if you've only played the games. Essi Daven, one of the few women that Dandelion won't sleep with. In fact, he refers to her as Little Eye, due to her only showing one of her blue eyes most of the time, and she is practically a little sister figure to him. Essi feels the same way too, with her actually going down as one of Geralt's lovers, at least technically speaking. But what makes her so tragic? Well, let's have a look at A Little Sacrifice to tell you why. And, of course, spoilers for those who want to read the books. Seriously, spoilers, I don't want anyone in the comments complaining that I did not warn you. But, as it is one of the short stories, it is entirely self-contained. Now, we begin in the seaside region of Bremervoord, ruled by the arrogant Prince Aglavol, who is in his Disney Renaissance arc and has fallen in love with a mermaid named Sheenaz. Because no counsellor on Earth is qualified, Aglavol hires Geralt to act as his translator to try and convince Sheenaz to trade her fins for legs and leave the sea behind, because our boy Jerry here knows the Elder Speech. Sheenaz refuses, stating that Aglavol should give up his life on land instead, and that the man is unwilling to make a little sacrifice.
He said it!
The prince argues that he can't on the very logical basis that he can't breathe underwater. No, you know what, he brings up a valid point there. Ultimately, it ends in a bit of an argument between Sheenaz and Aglavol, with Geralt being in the middle. Problem is, Geralt is a witcher, not a mediator, so nothing becomes of the discussion. Sheenaz leaves, and Aglavol is butthurt he can't get with his fishy lover, refusing to pay Geralt, so the witcher decides to chill in Bremervoord with Dandelion. The pair end up attending a betrothal feast to which Dandelion is hired to perform at. Here he ends up performing alongside Essi, and calls her a professional rival, before introducing her to Geralt. Now, Essi took one look at this gruff, weathered and somewhat freaky looking man and said to herself, "Oh my." Now, Geralt is kind of socially incompetent, and while he didn't feel anything towards Essi, he kisses her anyway, basically out of awkwardness, which, as you can imagine, isn't as effective as just letting her down easy. During the celebrations, Aglavol hears of some pearl divers mysteriously dying, and, with a Witcher on hand, he hires Geralt to investigate. Despite the Witcher not being all too happy with the situation with Aglavol, he and Dandelion are broke, which may or may not be Dandelion's fault, and very hungry, so he takes the job for some cash. Before the contract can officially begin, Geralt and Dandelion have a conversation about Essi, given her advances with the Witcher earlier. It should be noted that Geralt is still hung up about Yennefer, with the pair having this constantly ebbing and flowing relationship, which tears them apart and brings them back together over and over. Dandelion, in his usually flowery tone, explains that Geralt's initial interpretation of Essi's advances, i.e. her being morbidly curious about being with a Witcher, is simply incorrect. Plainly put, she just likes him. And Dandelion even tries to play matchmaker for a bit, comparing the relative normalcy of Essi with the abrasive nature of Yennefer, which ends up striking a chord with Geralt. I bring this up because it's important to understand Geralt's emotional state when it comes to how he and Essi interact. He's already irritable because of the lack of money and food, and is somewhat of a scorned lover, with Yennefer leaving him. He's confused, and doesn't really know how to deal with Essi being relatively kind, curious, and having a thing for him, even though he doesn't feel the same way. This doesn't stop Essi from tagging along, calling herself nosy as she joins Geralt and Dandelion as they go to the shore to investigate. The Witcher admits he knows very little about sea monsters, with Essi showing a genuine curiosity in Geralt's work, while the pair talk about the likely suspects for the Pearl Divers' disappearances. Essi states that she grew up by the sea, and knows a little bit about sea monsters, so the pair get to theorising, but before they can get much further, Aglavol turns up. He bitches and moans about how his mermaid lover didn't come to see him and takes out his frustration on Geralt. Essi defends him before the prince leaves, then goes on about how the Witcher is really a softy at heart. Geralt then does his whole "I'm a Witcher and I don't have feelings blah blah blah" routine we see a lot in the games, to which Essi essentially replies, "That's bollocks," and we all know that's bollocks. Obviously, Sapkowski is a lot more eloquent than I am here, but you get the idea. As the pair continue to talk and walk along the beach, the tide recedes, and the mermaid Sheenaz spots them, asking after her prince. She points out that he didn't want to wait a measly 3 hours for her, then proceeds to call Geralt and Essi a handsome couple because apparently everyone is playing matchmaker. Unfortunately, Geralt manages to offend Essi by stating that he hardly knows her, and when he goes out to investigate the next day, he only has Dandelion for company. The pair end up going pearl collecting in the hope of baiting out the monsters. Instead, they discover a massive underwater city with steps leading down a great trench and are attacked by crazy fish people. As he's running away and getting his ass kicked, Geralt makes a mental declaration that he'll go and find Yennefer and try again if he survives the ordeal, before being saved by Sheenaz, who tells them to go home and that the sea isn't for them. Then the pair end up with Essi, where she helps patch up Geralt's wounds, and while the majority of the shells collected were duds, one held a rare blue pearl, which is gifted to Essi as a sort of apology. She then confesses her love to Geralt, because, well, if you've played the games, you know that this man gets with everybody under the sun, and it's no different in the books. The problem is, while Essi is confessing and essentially conveying her confusion regarding her feelings, Geralt is mainly thinking about Yennefer and how she might feel the same way as Essi does about him. It's made clear that Essi isn't Yennefer, and her knowing about Yennefer through Dandelion's big mouth only makes the realization worse. Geralt ends up reporting to Aglavol about the underwater city and the sentient nature of his inhabitants. Aglavol, being an arse, refuses to pay Geralt again, so Essi defends him. Again. Aglavol then goes on about how humanity will one day descend the steps to that underwater city and conquer it, blah blah blah, but all that bluster vanishes when Sheenaz turns up with legs. That's right, she actually pulled a little mermaid and made a little sacrifice to be with her lover, and also because there might be a war if Aglavol doesn't pipe down. But while we're now done with the whole mermaid ordeal, this isn't actually where the story ends. Geralt, Dandelion and Essi leave Bremervoord behind, and before they go their separate ways, Dandelion shows some actual maturity. He states in his usual Dandelion way that the relationship cannot work, that Essi is expecting the impossible from the Witcher, while Geralt just needs to say his feelings plainly. He does not reciprocate the love Essi feels for him, despite the pair getting along very well. In the end, they lie with one another anyway, sharing a night before allowing each other to move on. Dandelion even writes a ballad, although it's not about the affair of unrequited love. It's more a story about love at first sight, but it's Dandelion, he just does what he wants, I guess. Now, while Essi's unrequited love for Geralt would have been tragic enough on its own, there's a little more to this that I don't think I can do justice in a summary. I think it's best to read the final few paragraphs of the story straight from the book. So, once again, I implore you to read the Witcher novels. They really are that good, and there's still a lot to enjoy from the story despite my summary. So, go read it now before I do it for you a bit here. The ballad told of a certain witcher and a certain poet, about how the witcher and the poet met on the seashore, among the crying of seagulls, and how they fell in love at first sight, about how beautiful and powerful was their love, about how nothing, not even death, was able to destroy that love and part them. Dandelion knew that few would believe the story told by the ballad, but he was not concerned. He knew ballads were not written to be believed, but to move their audience. Several years later, Dandelion could have changed the contents of the ballad and written about what had really occurred. He did not. For the true story would not have moved anyone. Who would have wanted to hear that the Witcher and Little Eye parted and never ever saw each other again? About how 4 years later, Little Eye died of the smallpox during an epidemic raging in Vizima. About how he, Dandelion, had carried her out in his arms between corpses being cremated on funeral pyres and had buried her far from the city, in a forest, alone and peaceful, and, as she had asked, buried 2 things with her: her lute and a sky blue pearl. The pearl from which she was never parted. No, Dandelion stuck with his first version, and he never sang it. Never. To no one. right before dawn, when it was still dark, a hungry, vicious werewolf crept up to their camp, but saw that it was Dandelion. So he listened for a moment, and then went on his way.
You flee my dream come the morning, your scent, berries tart, lilac sweet, to dream of raven locks and twisted storm